whereby these bigger corporations are putting the investors ahead of the people that work for them. I know there's always going to be a disparity because some companies, it's great, they've kept people for 25 years. They might be on a higher whack. But these are companies who are putting investors and shareholders ahead of the people. And the train service, honest to God, Nick, it was the quality of the actual trains, the number of times I've stood on train platforms, it's gone, we can't have a train because it's faulty, or it's this, it's that, and another. Yeah. It's shocking.
Well, so do you, in a way, are you not arguing against yourself? Because with more industrial action, people, as you've done, John, will simply get in their cars, so there'll be fewer passengers, so there'll be less revenue, and the rail companies will have to make even further cuts, surely.
For me, Nick, they need to invest in the people, they need to invest in their infrastructure. They're too busy putting it into the actual shareholders' pockets as opposed to doing the investing where, A, the most important thing should be the people, those that are driving the trains, and B, should be about investing in the actual stock and the infrastructure.
John, and I don't blame you, you're talking as a bloke who, because of the service, has decided to get in your car. If everyone was to do that, the argument could be made we need even fewer staff on the rails. They have to realise they are, I would argue, losing public support, John, lastly.
But this is where, Nick, we're coming up from two different directions. Is the reason I gave up on it is because they're charging me £500. Where is that £500 going? That's my question. Well, it doesn't cost £500 for my seat on that train.
He or she is making £1,000 a week, the person at the front of your train. That ain't bad money. Come on, John.
But if you look at what a Birmingham rent at the moment for a two-bedroom house is about £1,000 a month.
All right, OK. Well, that indeed is a lot of money, but if we gave in to every single pay demand, the country would effectively be skint. John, thank you. You have safe driving in your trip to Sheffield. Let's talk about money with a very appropriate person. Someone who used to chair the Treasury Select Committee is now Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride, who we'll talk to about rail strikes. But first, let's talk about the fact that, well, nearly 12 million of you will start to receive up to £600 from, if I've got my diary correct, from today. The Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride joins me now with more details. Good to have you on, Secretary of State. What exactly are these people going to be in receipt of? Good morning to you.
Well, good morning, Nick. Yes, so almost 12 million pensioners will be receiving an additional £300 alongside their winter fuel payments. And those payments are going out, as you said, as of today. I think 1.6 million will be out today, and they'll be going out over the next couple of months. Critical point is that pensioners don't need to apply for it. It happens automatically. And of course, this is part of a much wider programme of support for low-income households, for example, who are getting £650 this year, disabled people £150, and of course our energy support package on energy bills, capping the average bill at £2,500, saving the average family £900 for this year.
Just lastly, just thinking, if someone, I hear what you say, Secretary of State, that it should come automatically. If someone listening now is not in receipt, is there a website, is there a phone number? To whom should they make themselves known?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Nick. The first thing is patience. So these payments are being made over a 2-month period. So do wait at least that period. Then go on to the .gov.uk website, and there will be details there as to what you do if you think you should have received it and you haven't.
All right. Thank you for the background on that. I've obviously, while I have the benefit of you, I have to ask you about the questions. We would appear to be looking at a considerable wave of rail strikes. Secretary of State, is Mick Lynch the Grinch who stole Christmas?
Well, I put it this way, Nick. I don't think it's right that the unions have announced strike action, which has been clearly designed to create maximum disruption across the festive period. Now, that, of course, will affect families up and down the country who want to see loved ones. But I think there's a more important point within that, which is whenever you hold strike action on our railways, of course, you impact people who are actually in very serious circumstances. For example, those that need to attend serious medical appointments, for example. So I think what we should have seen instead of announcing this action is more discussion, more energy and vigour in engaging with the employers and with Network Rail to come to a solution. And by that, I mean something that is fair to taxpayers, because it's all got to be funded in very difficult times, something that's fair to passengers, because ultimately in one form or another, they will pay in the future for whatever is agreed, but also fair to the sector and the workers themselves, bearing in mind that billions of pounds, Nick, went into supporting the railways during the pandemic, including preserving the jobs of those that work there.
Is a bit of blame, if I can use that word, to be shared, though, with the government, Mr. Stride? I remind you, back in 2019, the manifesto of the party, of course, of which you're a senior member, said that they would bring in regulations, they would bring in laws and restrictions that would have some kind of minimum service. Mel Stride, 3 years on, where are they?
So where we are on that, Nick, is I'm pleased to let your listeners know that legislation has been introduced to the House of Commons. That means it's had its first reading. That's the first step in the legislative process. It remains to be seen when the other steps will occur, but I can assure you that government is very aware, acutely aware of the importance of this legislation, and we are fully committed to it.
Timeline, can you give my listeners any indication, with your knowledge of parliamentary process, when might that actually become law, Secretary of State?
I can't. If I were the leader of the House, which I used to be in a previous life, I could probably give you a greater sense of it, because, of course, it has to be factored and scheduled in with so many other moving parts and other pieces of legislation. So I'm not in a position to do that, other than to just make it very clear that there is a very, very firm commitment to getting this legislation through, because it really matters.
In another previous life, you chaired the Treasury Select Committee. Can I ask you about a report from the OECD, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development? Just to remind my listeners, the UK economy will suffer the biggest hit of all G7 nations next year. How concerned, even fearful, should my listeners be?
Well, growth is something that clearly happens in every year, not in one specific year. And in fact, in this year, we've had the highest level of growth across the G7. It's fair to say, I think, that all major economies, almost without exception, are suffering on the growth front, on the inflation front at the moment. And in fact, the IMF is saying that about a third of global economies are in or about to go into recession. And in fact, if you look at what the OBR says in the more medium term, we will, once we get through this fairly shallow recession, actually, and some of the actions that the government's taken, the Chancellor's taken, have helped to shallow that recession, we will see growth resuming, actually up and to above 2% in the last 2 years of the OBR's forecast, which is well above the kind of trend growth that we've had for the last decade or so. So a lot of work to be done, but I don't think we should focus just on that 1 year to get the overall picture on growth.
Staying with money, will you be charging the taxpayer for your office Christmas party?
No, most definitely not. Can I make a really important point here?
You can do what, within reason, Mr. Stride, as long as you keep it legal. You can do what you like.
All right. Can I make a reasonable, important point? Okay. So I think it's really important. You know, MPs get a really hard time for a lot of reasons, and often that is quite justified and rightly so. But there are some times when, frankly, we end up in a position which is not of our making, and we end up, there's still a rod for our back, and this is one of them. So no MP took a decision to allow office parties to be paid for at the public expense. It's a body called IPSA, which is an independent body that oversees MPs' expenses, that unilaterally took that decision. And I certainly know from my point of view, and many colleagues that I've spoken to on both sides of the House, that we're very disappointed by this, because most MPs, I suspect, will do what I do, which is we will not be claiming that, and never wanted to be able to claim it in the first place.
But my understanding, Secretary of State, is IPSA only said that because they'd had a number of inquiries. That's why they actually came out with it. So, in fairness, it wasn't as if it was completely out of the blue, Mr. Stride.
Well, it certainly wasn't determined by MPs through any formal process that I was aware of, and all I can report is that, and I'm on the various WhatsApp groups of Conservative backbenchers and so on, is that people my colleagues seem to be very disappointed that we've been put in a position where we're given this opportunity, because most of us feel that we shouldn't be doing that, which is what I feel.
Lastly, you chaired the Treasury Select Committee for a number of years. You're certainly a man who knows how many bolts make six, and you've come on and told us that the government is helping nearly 12 million people with these extra payments. Meanwhile, at the palace, the king dines on best pheasant, fondant, potatoes, grilled brill, plus the finest wines for a state visit, this time for South Africa. What value state visits? Mel Stride.
I think they can be hugely valued, and I think in terms of projecting ourselves as a country right at the heart, actually, of our soft power, as it's often called, is this ability to project our sense of history and pageant and the royal family has a key role.
But you know as well as
that.
I do,
and I think that's
people
what state
can't
visits
turn on
are about.
Mr. Stride, people can't turn on the gas, and I hear what you say.
Yeah.
Is it a good look at times like this? Should we perhaps just for a year? Go ahead.
Okay, so I would see it in terms of engaging with our most important trading partner on the continent of Africa, with whom we have very important ties of history and trade and economics. And what really we want to come out of this is a stronger and healthier UK economy, and that benefits everybody. And I think whether it's pheasant on the plate or pie and mash, I think if that can be achieved, then that's the biggest prize of all.
Grateful for your time today. Thank you. Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride, appearing here at LBC 3 minutes after 8. Let's get the latest news.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, ministers will hold talks with rail union officials this week to urge them to call off